This challenge run was rather special. The challenge conditions were to beat the game, on hard of course, with no reactor power. Literally none. No backup battery either, just Zoltans. So you start the game with 4 Zoltan crew and you can get up to 8. And that's it. Let's jump straight to the flagship fight. This is a heavily edited version because I've removed all of the pausing. That means you can watch it in about 3 or 4 minutes, whereas in real time it would take about 2.5 hours. Afterwards, if you're interested, I will be back with more commentary. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the madness. This was by far the hardest challenge run that I'd ever done. I feel it really pushed me to the limit of my ability as an FTL player. I needed to mod the game to make it possible, so let's start by explaining the mod setup. I made a mod called Zoltan C Hell, which did 2 main things. It removed the reactor from Zoltan C and it also removed the backup battery. And when you remove the reactor from a ship, you get this really weird graphical glitch, which is kind of funny, so I fixed that. And then I also made 2 small concessions to sanity. The first one is that I removed all of the free reactor upgrades from the game. There's a number of events where you can get a reactor upgrade as a reward. Just to be clear, I didn't remove the event outcomes, I just removed the upgrade. So for example, in the civilian distress event where they're asking you for fuel, one of the outcomes is a reactor upgrade. It's still possible for me to get that outcome, I just don't get anything. And that makes it a little bit less punishing. I'm able to take those gambles, as it were, without the risk of outright losing the game or breaking the challenge condition. The other concession I made was to remove the backup battery from stores, so it wouldn't take up a system slot. I did leave the battery charger augment in, however. I feel these concessions are very reasonable. Not having the backup battery in stores is almost exactly the same as having the backup battery on your ship and just never using it. The same goes for getting a free reactor upgrade and then just never using it, which would be really hard to keep track of. And then, apart from visual mods and the fleet pursuit indicator, which I consider to be purely a quality of life mod, you can do exactly the same thing with a sheet of tracing paper if you really want to. The other mod that I used was balance mod. That's because I always play on balance mod nowadays, but this challenge really pushed me close to giving up and going back to vanilla FTL. Balance mod makes this challenge a whole lot harder due to the changes that are made to hacking. In balance mod, hacking costs 130 scrap to buy the system, and then the second level upgrade costs 55 scrap. That's up from 80 and 35 respectively. So you're effectively paying 70 scrap more for hacking. And then I also need a defense scrambler which costs 40 scrap, so that brings it up to 110 scrap. I need that because in balance mod the hacking bypass has been removed, meaning that enemy defense drones fire a laser that is fast enough to reliably shoot down your hacking drone even if you toggle the power. Even if I get a free defense scrambler, which I didn't, I would still be effectively losing out on 40 scrap because in vanilla I would just sell that and get 40 scrap. In the end though, I persevered, and I'm glad I did. I'm really satisfied to have completed this challenge, even though it was brutal at times. It took me, I don't know, maybe 30 runs? At most 40, I would say. Probably more like 30. I wasn't actually counting. A lot of those were resets in the early game, like Sector 1 or 2. I don't normally allow myself to reset the game, even on challenge runs, but this challenge is so rough. I don't have the words to explain how rough it is. So I did let myself reset. Let's take a look at what a fight looks like at the start of the game. I didn't have any recorded from the actual run, so I just started a new run. The first thing I do is save my Zoltans positions in a slightly odd way. I want to put one Zoltan in the square next to drones, and the other Zoltan on the right hand square in drones, and then have two in weapons. Notice that we can't actually jump without a Zoltan in engines and piloting. So those Zoltans are going to be walking to the drones room. And this is how we start fights. There's no evasion and the FTL isn't charging, and we have no shields and no one in oxygen, because we need to run the weapon and the drone. And the reason I saved the crew positions where they were is I found it convenient to just shift that Zoltan out of the drone's room when I want to stop the beam drone from moving. There's a lot of situations like this where you have to decide between running your weapon and drone at the same time or having a shield. It works out fine in this fight, but you can imagine how it could be problematic if you face a more dangerous enemy or you're in asteroid field, and especially when enemies are trying to get away, it becomes a little bit difficult to balance all of the competing concerns. I'll also just quickly note that our clone bay doesn't work unless it has a Zoltan standing in it, which led to a number of fun losses. Let's take a look at some fights from the actual game that I did record. I have hacking and cloaking. You might notice my beam drone has gone missing. That's because I had to sell it in order to afford cloaking. You really need hacking and cloaking, and you need them upgraded really by sector 6 or so. If you don't have them, then you just die. I had a few runs where I just fizzled out because I couldn't find those systems, or I couldn't afford them at the right time. You need a lot of scrap to get this going. In total, it's not a lot of scrap, but the problem is it's very front-loaded, because you need to be able to buy Zoltans at any time, pretty much. 4 Zoltans is, 240 scrap. And you need the next 2 Zoltans pretty fast. If you get into like sector 5 or so with only 4 or 5 Zoltans, then it's really bad. You also need to be able to buy quite specific weapons. The ion bomb is crucial. I got really lucky on this run. I got that for free. The hull beam I bought, and I got a 5 scrap discount because balance mod, so yay. You can also see I already have the defense scrambler. That's why I was able to hack them in this fight. And in addition, you really need to save scrap for a pre-igniter. When I was originally planning this, I thought it would be completely impossible without a pre-igniter. Anyway, the strategy at the moment is to use hacking on engines or piloting to drop their evasion to 0 and then ion bomb their weapons. And that keeps us quite safe for a while, and then we can stack other ion on the shields and use the hull beam to slowly whittle them down. But the real reason I want to show you this fight is that I discovered the very rare enemy anti-anti drone. That's right, they have an anti-combat drone. You might not recognize it just yet, but you'll see it in a moment. There it is, revealing its true nature. Here's an interesting clip about boarding defense. The beacon immediately before this, I got event boarded by a bunch of mantis. I think it was 4 of them, which was not a lot of fun. And then this. Anyway, you might notice that I'm not venting out the room in the middle of the ship, or trying to vent drones here, because I don't want to drive them into piloting. And what I'm going to do is dance in and out of the cloaking room, which is going to delay them breaking down the blast doors, but it also has a really interesting effect that it causes the enemy who's in piloting to bounce back and forth as well. So I've kind of got these 3 borders on a string, just with this one Zoltan. 2 of them are taking damage from suffocation, and the other one's taking damage by getting beaten up 2-on-1 in piloting. And the reason that's happening is that the 2 in cloaking are alternating between wanting to stay in cloaking, because if my crew goes into cloaking, then they have to reposition and fight them. And when my crew leaves, they want to get out of the cloaking room, and they're heading to either weapons or drones, which is a 4-tiled room. And as soon as they start heading for a 4-tile room, the one who's in piloting wants to come and join them. And that's why that crew is bouncing back and forth as well. here's what a late game fight looks like. This is in Sector 7. I picked up the second charge ion at a store at the beginning of the sector. And now you can see I have fully upgraded hacking and cloaking. And ever since I got that, I took basically no damage. You can see I have 3 Zoltans in cloaking, and I'm using that time to charge all the ion weapons. The ion bomb is sitting in storage, by the way. And once the cloak is done, those 3 Zoltans go straight into hacking, and we hack weapons. So we're alternating cloak and hack. By doing this, almost no enemy weapons actually get to fire at all. It's worth noting that this means our Zoltan shield never goes down, so we never have to deal with hacking, or mind control, or boarding. And now, as it happens, this enemy does have one of the few weapons in the game that can get past this tactic, the charge laser, because it has such a short individual charge cooldown. However, even that weapon struggles to get anywhere against this setup. The reason that we're not using the ion bomb, by the way, is partly just to save missiles for the future, but mainly because it becomes very unreliable when you're not hacking engines. It's not a lot of fun when an ion bomb misses. So we charge all of the ion weapons and then we fire them. That's a lot of iron that will take down any number of shields reasonably quickly through any amount of evasion. And then we switch some of them off, one of the charge ions, and power the hull beam. You might also notice that I have a new beam drone, a beam drone Mark II, which I found in a store. I think that was the same store in Sector 7, or actually no, I think it was the store after it. And then at some point I managed to get my hands on another beam drone Mark I as well. That might have been the last store in this sector, or maybe it was in Sector 8. So I got to the last store in Sector 7 and it didn't have a pre-igniter. I'd been looking for the pre-igniter all game long, and at that point I thought the run was probably lost. But there's always a small chance that you can find the store in Sector 8. So I carried on, and I did find the store in Sector 8, and it didn't have a pre-igniter. And at that point I was pretty much certain I couldn't win. But I carried on anyway. I thought I might as well get to the flagship. And here you see me one jump before the flagship. I'm actually at the base. At this point I left the game for some time and I started making a new plan for how to beat Phase 1 without a pre-igniter. And I took quite some time over this. I even put together a document and I did change my mind about the plan I was going to use multiple times. This was also the first time that I'd made it to the flagship on this challenge, so I didn't have any previous experience to fall back on. It was really uncharted territory. And I really didn't want to fuck it up because who knows how long it would be until I got another shot at this. And now I'm just positioning my Zoltans. We're going to be waiting at the base, which means that when we make the jump, our crew don't move. So they will be in these exact positions when we jump. Alright, the first thing we do is cloak immediately and position the beam drone. I'm cloaking at the start of the battle because it delays the flagship weapons a great deal, and it also frees up that power for later. There's no point having crew in weapons at the moment because we can't charge our weapons while the flagship cloak is active. And then I'm just going to be dancing back and forth with the Zoltan in cloaking. We're moving our pilot and engine Zoltan into weapons because we'll need them there at some point. They had to stay in piloting an engine during the jump. And we have a Zoltan in oxygen. They're not doing anything particularly important, but might as well keep your O2 up. And I'm watching the beam drone. As soon as it's ready, I want to move those 2 Zoltans out into weapons. You have to be very careful with this micro, by the way, because sometimes a crew will not follow instructions. You want them to turn around and they actually keep going and leave the room. It doesn't happen very often. It's a weird kind of bug. So I need to leave a bit of room. before they reach the door, and then I pause very quickly to see that they have actually turned around. The next thing I need to do is organize my Zoltans a little bit, just to make it easier to micro them. So I want them to be moving in sync. And you'll see I get them both in the center of the room and just fiddle with them a bit. Little bit of Zoltan twiddling here. And once they're moving together, we can just keep them both selected and move them back and forth. At this point, there's really nothing happening for some time. I'm just moving my Zoltans back and forth in cloaking and weapons, so I'll revert to the no pause version. Now that the cloak is over, we have 3 Zoltans who can be used elsewhere. So I move 2 of them into hacking and 1 into weapons. That means we're powering all of our weapons, and we're also going to use a level 2 hack on evasion. You'll see why it's level 2 in a minute, but the main idea is that we're going to completely remove their shields by doing 7 ion damage with the ion bomb and the charge ion. And then we're going to send 2 ion shots into cloaking. This wasn't the strategy that I expected to be using, by the way. I originally thought that I would be forced to hack cloaking and then just take my chances on the ion bomb landing. But there's a 20% chance that it misses. And if that happens, we're probably doomed. I've never used a strategy like this before, I think. Certainly not to this level of precision. And the only reason I came up with it is that I spent a lot of time planning and preparing and thinking about the fight before I actually did it. So the thing to take away from this, I guess, is that even as a very experienced player, your first instincts are not necessarily the correct ones. In a situation where it might actually matter, maybe take some time and consider what options are available to you, and some of them might be ones that you don't immediately see. A little bit more Zoltan twiddling here. I want to stack these Zoltans so they overlap, and I'm moving 2 of them together in weapons because we now have 6 Zoltans in weapons. I move the charge ion to the furthest back weapon slot because I want it to take longer to travel to the flagship. By making it take longer to arrive at the flagship shields, it effectively means that I can start my hack later, which has the effect of making the hack last longer for the other shots. So I'm going to fire the first volley of the charge ion from this backwards mounting point, and then later you'll see I move it forwards. And now nothing is happening until the charge ion finishes charging, so we'll speed it up a bit. I'm targeting the ion bomb at shields, of course, and the charge ion at cloaking. It's still going to hit the shields. I start the hack just after the first ion shot has left the screen, so I want to start the hack as late as possible, but make sure it does start before the ion arrives at the shields. I rearranged my weapons again now. I moved the charge ion forwards, as I said, and I also moved the ion blast forward because I want that to hit as soon as possible. And I moved the ion bomb to the 4th weapon slot, as that is going to be the first weapon that I take offline. This might be a good opportunity to talk about weapon timings. I'm actually getting a small amount of help from balance mod here with the ion bomb. It appears to make a big difference at first, but when you analyze the situation correctly, I think the difference is very, very slight. But nevertheless, the ion bomb in vanilla is 22 seconds. In balance mod, it's 21 seconds. That means that with the manning bonus, it's firing at 16.8 seconds. And it explodes at exactly 18.5 seconds. When the ion bomb explodes, I can use my hull beam, but then the flagship is going to cloak at 20 seconds. That's just 1.5 seconds after the ion bomb. So what I do here is fire an ion blast into cloaking. Because the hack is still active, it's guaranteed to hit, and that extends the cloak cooldown from 20 seconds to 25 seconds. That gives me long enough to fire a charge ion shot into cloaking and extend it by another 5 seconds. So in total, we're increasing the cooldown on the flagship cloaking from 20 seconds to 30 seconds. I'm rearranging my weapons again because the ion blast is now fired. I can take that offline. The ion bomb has already materialized on the enemy ship, so I can take that offline. Those 2 Zoltans are heading into shields. They're going to block some of the beam damage. The hull beam can do 9 damage to the flagship in phases 1 and 2. You need to hit 4 empty rooms and medbay. Again, rearranging my weapons because I don't need the charge ion anymore. I'm going to take those 2 Zoltans out of weapons and put them into drones. The charge ion shot has hit, so now I don't need hacking anymore. And I move those 2 Zoltans into cloaking. I'm a little bit concerned about my beam drone position here, so I fiddle my Zoltans around. The drone does 1 damage, and then I move the Zoltan out of the room to just make sure it doesn't get shot down by a missile. I did think about putting 4 Zoltans in shields instead of having the 2 in drones, and that would completely block the beam weapon from damaging us. But I decided against it because it would take more than 3 seconds for the Zoltans to walk from shields into drones, and they'd only have 1 second in drones to do 2 damage with beam drones. And even if I micro power between the 2 drones, that's not long enough to guarantee it. The Beam Drone Mark II, if I'd positioned it, might be able to do that by itself, but it might not. It could hit for 1 damage instead. And I decided I wanted to kill the flagship before it cloaked. I thought that was slightly better. Now that the missiles have fired, I can reactivate the drone. At this point I can see the beam weapon is hitting us in shields, and I can also see that that last missile is not going to hit us in weapons, and it's heading in fact for oxygen. The significance of that is that I'm not going to lose the manning bonus in my weapons, and I will kill them before they cloak. If the missile was heading for weapons here, then I would walk one of the drone Zoltans into cloaking and do a 15-second cloak, and that should last long enough to stop them from hacking me. I'm not absolutely certain about that. I didn't actually run all the numbers on that one. And this is a place where I made a small mistake. I should have had the anti-drone equipped instead of the Beam Drone Mark II, I think, just to give us another defense against hacking in case it made it through just in time to hack weapons. A weapons hack would be the end of us, I think. Even if they cloak, by the way, it's not as bad as it seems because our cloak offsets their weapons. They'll get to fire the ion weapon, which is irrelevant. They won't get to fire any other weapons. Even if somehow the hack gets through, there's not a very high chance that it actually targets our weapons. If this was vanilla rather than balance mod, I think I would still use the same strategy. We would definitely not be able to kill them before they cloaked, but I don't think it would likely matter. The chance of them hacking weapons is very low, especially if I had actually played correctly and equipped the anti-drone. After phase 1, I can just afford a weapons buffer, and that is the best use of my scrap. For phase 2, I definitely want the anti-drone, and because it has 22 health instead of 20, I'll need the drones to deal 4 damage. So I'm going to keep the Beam Drone Mark II instead of the Beam Drone Mark I. This time we're jumping to the flagship because I want to move my crew. The pilot is going into drones because I want to have 4 Zoltans in drones as soon as possible. And the engines crew is going to hacking, that's a lot less urgent. And the oxygen crew is going to go into weapons. I should probably mention that I did the same thing for phase 2 as I did for phase 1. I took a long break and I went and made a plan. I wrote it down in great detail and I did change it multiple times. And then the same thing happened with phase 3 as well. We deploy the anti-drone immediately. It will always target the combat drone, by the way, and then we deploy the beam drone as soon as possible. The strategy for phase 2 is a lot simpler than phase 1 because the flagship doesn't have cloaking, or indeed hacking, but we need to save our cloak for the power surge. The fastest I can kill the flagship is just over 30 seconds, and that will not happen before the drone swarm hits. If we're out of cloak when the drone swarm hits, then we're basically dead. At this point the beam drone is in position, so I can move 3 of the Zoltans out of the room. I move 2 of them into shields and 1 into weapons. I want to have the shield up because the lasers are going to fire and the 2 combat drones are still around. I can't really cloak before the lasers fire because that will cause me to disrupt my own cloak with the ion bomb, and I really want to use a full 15-second cloak if possible. I also position the hack at this point. Remember, this is balance mod, so the defense scrambler is actually required for using hacking here, and without it there's a 25% chance that the ion bomb will miss. I'm now waiting for the hack to arrive before I can start charging my hull beam. So I twiddle that Zoltan so they stand in the doorway and they're just that little bit closer to moving into weapons. I move the drone Zoltan into the top right corner because I'm preparing to move them into hacking. Nothing really happens for a bit, so I'll just speed it up for a while. I need to move my drone Zoltan into hacking pretty soon because I'll need to fire the charge ion pretty much immediately. I'll want that power from the charge ion to be used in cloaking instead, as I want to cloak the missiles. I can't really cloak the lasers instantly because they're firing at 15 seconds and that is before my ion bomb fires. The ion bomb fires at 16.8 seconds. However, weapons seem to disrupt cloaking very slightly after the charge reset time. I think the time that they actually disrupt cloaking is when they make the firing sound. So I want to wait for the ion bomb firing sound, which is a little bit longer. That still gives me time to cloak the missiles. Anyway, what that means is that I'm trying to get one more shot out of the anti-drone. It should, in principle, be able to get 3 shots, but it was a little bit delayed when it initially fired. I think I make a small mistake here. I try to get that last shot by twiddling my Zoltan in the doorway, but I lose my nerve and I decide I'd better make it over to hacking. I think that was incorrect. If I'd held my nerve, I probably would have taken 1 less point of damage, maybe. But in any case, it is more important to get into hacking in good time. I rearrange my weapons because I'm preparing to take the charge ion offline. And some more Zoltan twiddling to get those 2 Zoltans out of the weapons room as soon as the charge ion has finished firing and move them into cloaking. I also have the hacking Zoltan positioned on the bottom tile rather than the default top tile because I want them as close to cloaking as possible. I'm preparing to depower the ion bomb, so I move the bottom right Zoltan in weapons to the left tile, getting ready to move them into drones. Our Zoltan's shield just went down, and you might have heard the boarding drone deployment just then. We are going to cloak before that boarding drone reaches us. There's the ion bomb firing sound, so I should be able to cloak now. But I decided not to because I still need to wait on the hack, and I want to get that hacking Zoltan into cloaking as soon as possible after the cloak. I can see that the combat drone isn't firing at anything that matters, so I decide to let that one hit. You can see the flagship shield room just lit up visible. That's because the ion bomb is now on their ship. That means I can move one of my weapon Zoltans into drones, and it also means I can move the Zoltan out of hacking. In fact, I'm a little bit late moving that Zoltan. I should have twiddled them a bit more carefully. I can't delay my cloak any longer without allowing that beam drone to hit us for 1 or 2 damage, so I cloak now and I will get almost a 15-second cloak. Watch the cloaking bar here and you'll see that when the Zoltan walks into the room, they overcharge the cloak and boost it back up to almost 15 seconds. The amount of time that you get back from this boost depends on how long you waited before bringing the Zoltan into the room. So because we got the Zoltan in really quickly, we get almost our full 15-second cloak. If we'd put them in at the last second, then we'd get very little back. Now that we're cloaked, shields don't do anything at all for 15 seconds, so we're moving those 2 Zoltans out of shields into drones. We need the beam drone to hit at least twice because it needs to do 4 damage. Here come the missiles, and fortunately we can see that none of them are targeting cloaking. If one of these missiles had hit cloaking through 60% evasion, then we could be in some serious trouble. specifically if we get a very late drone surge, which is in fact what happens. The chance of a missile hitting cloaking through 60% evasion on this specific ship in these exact circumstances is approximately 13%, so we have pretty good odds here of being fine. And it wouldn't really change anything I do because I'd still want to try cloaking that missile, and I don't want to let the beam hit me either. The beam drone has now hit twice for 2 damage, so we don't need it anymore, and I moved 2 of those Zoltans into shields, leaving 1 in drones for the anti-drone. Now, neither of these things actually matters at all because our cloak does cover us until we kill them. I'm just doing this as a backup, really. I upgrade engines because I have literally nothing else to spend that scrap on, and I want both beam drones for phase 3. We're going to be jumping to the flagship again. I move my pilot into doors so that they will pass through the drones room, and I move my engines crew into weapons. I'll also move my oxygen crew into drones. I'm prioritising drones here because I want those 2 beam drones running as soon as possible. The ion blast can wait a little bit longer. We'll be starting the battle with 5 crew in drones and 3 in weapons. The reason I'm prioritising drones over additional ion is that the beam drones have a higher damage output against the Zoltan shield. Especially the beam drone Mark II, because that does 2 damage every shot against the Zoltan shield. We go into this fight in really good shape. We have 25 hull, which means we kill them before they kill us. So hull damage is just not an issue. Roughly speaking, all we need to do to win is keep our weapons and drones online, and it's almost impossible for the flagship to take them offline directly because we have plenty of system buffers for those systems. However, the real threat is interference with our crew. Our crew are quite fragile, and if they are forced to leave the rooms, then we lose power in those rooms. In particular, mind control, borders, and status effects such as fires, also breaches, are really dangerous. Remember that mind control acts as a magnet for enemy borders, so if we get mind controlled in the weapons room, then all the enemy borders will try to go into that room. If we then get hit by a laser or a missile and that starts a fire, then we're fighting the mind controlled crew and possibly borders, and we can't put out the fires are going to spread, and that can force our Zoltans to leave the room. With that in mind, my strategy is based around keeping the Zoltan shield up as long as possible, so that they can't mind control me or board me. I'm going to cloak the lasers because that's the only way to guarantee that my Zoltan shield does not go down after I cloak. So I will have the Zoltan shield up for the full duration of the cloak, or at least until the power surge, whenever that hits. If I cloak the missiles, then 2 of them could still hit during cloak, and then I would get mind controlled even though I'm cloaked, and that could be disastrous. My charge ion fires its second shot at 9.6 seconds, and the lasers are firing at 10, so I know that I need to go into cloaking soon. I get 1 more shot out of my beam drone Mark II, and then I need to send those 3 Zoltans into cloaking. We only hit 1 of the 3 ions that we fired against the Zoltan shield, but thankfully the beam drones are doing good enough work by themselves. Only 1 of the 3 lasers hit us, which is really good, as it means our Zoltan shield will stay up through the missiles and it will not go down until the power surge hits. I make a small mistake here because I move those 2 Zoltans in drones in the direction of cloaking and hacking, when what I should have done is move them directly to shields. Now I do correct that in a moment, and they do get into shields just in time to block one of the lasers from the power surge. But the main thing is I want them out of drones so they can't be mind controlled in drones. And for the same reason, I'm leaving those 2 Zoltans in cloaking. If they get mind controlled in cloaking, that's fine. I don't want them mind controlled in weapons or drones. But I do want them to be near to weapons and drones, as opposed to running one of them over to engines and one over to piloting, which is just too far away. The reason I initially moved those 2 Zoltans into cloaking, by the way, was that I needed to move one of the 3 cloaking Zoltans out into hacking to position the hack. But I also wanted to maximize my cloak time, so I thought I could do a kind of relay race where I put one Zoltan in the left-hand door as I'm taking one out the right-hand door. But in the end, I decide it's not really timing out well, and I want to get the Zoltans in shields, and I do calculate that I'd have just enough time to get them into shields and get a shield up. I'm twiddling my Zoltans in the weapons room so that they're all next to the door into oxygen. That's because as soon as the weapons have finished firing, I want to move them out of the weapons room so that they're not mind controlled in weapons. I'm using this to bait the mind control to be in something other than weapons. For a while I can't make up my mind about what to do with the last Zoltan in weapons. I could move them out of weapons, and that would guarantee that we don't get mind controlled in weapons. But on the other hand, it's somewhat useful to get the Ion Blast charging. The reason that we want the Ion Blast charging is that if our weapons get damaged, or if we get boarded into weapons, then we lose the manning bonus, and the hull beam will take 28 seconds if it's not manned to fire twice. And the flagship shields are only going to be down for about 27 seconds. The maximum ion stack is 25 seconds. So we need to hit potentially one more ion to be sure that the shield will stay down long enough. If I leave that Zoltan in weapons, then there's a 1 in 8 chance that they get mind controlled, which is fairly good odds. And if that does happen, I can always force them out the weapons room by venting them, and then reoccupying it, opening doors to let oxygen in, and so on. The mind control is now hit. It's mind controlled a Zoltan in hacking, so I can move my Zoltans back into weapons. I'm going to move 4 into weapons and 3 into drones. I'm fortifying the weapons room, as it were, both just to repair it quickly or deal with fires quickly, but also because I'm going to run the charge ion in a moment if that ion blast misses. And this is the point where I know for certain that I've won. That shot from the charge ion has landed, and that means that even if our weapons manning bonus is disrupted, the hull beam will still be able to fire twice before the shields come back up. The beam drone Mark II is about to fire. It does in fact hit for only 1 damage, but I have the beam drone Mark I positioned ready to fire immediately afterwards, and I switch to it. That 2 damage from the beam drones means that the hull beam only needs to hit twice for 8 damage per swipe, and that does 16 hull damage. It's 8 damage on phase 3 instead of 9 on the earlier phases, because one of the rooms that was empty is now filled by the teleporter, so the hull beam isn't getting double damage on that room. I don't need drones anymore, so I reassign those Zoltans to weapons and doors. Doors just to slow down the borders a bit, not that that's really needed. And weapons just to fortify weapons again. None of this is really needed at this point, but might as well. It's worth acknowledging that I only have 14 hull left. The power surge can do 7 damage, the lasers can do 3 damage, so that's 10. And then our oxygen is just about to burn down as well, so that's 11 damage. That would leave us with 3 hull, which means the missiles could kill us. But that's not going to happen because we will cloak before the missiles are firing, and therefore they won't get a chance to fire. It's really low scrap count. 40 ships defeated is a little bit on the low side. 100 beacons explored is okay. I did make some mistakes earlier in the game where I let ships get away that I might have been able to defeat. There was at least one Mantis bomber in Sector 7 that I could have killed if I'd played correctly. But I also just think I didn't get that much scrap on this run. But hey, who needs scrap if you're not spending money on reactor or shield upgrades or much of anything?